Michael Burry is an interesting person, and pretty much everyone, no matter if you agree with him or not, seems to love to hear from him directly. He's proven his salt in the past, he's predicted 3 massive bubbles over the last 2 decades, and he's absolutely destroyed the S&P 500's cumulative return over that same time period. He has, though, been given the moniker of a broken clock by thousands of different people who mostly don't really seem to understand how market crashes actually play out, and the idea that they are very rarely swift actions that are over within a week. Nowadays, he actually goes by Cassandra on Twitter, which is an ode to an ancient Greek woman who was blessed with the ability to see into the future and to predict what would happen, but was also given the curse of having no one believe her no matter how much she pled. It's safe to say that Michael Burry isn't exactly normal, but it is, in my opinion, always worthwhile to pay attention to what he's saying and doing, even if it might upset you a little bit. Now, every quarter, hedge funds and financial institutions that operate out of the United States have to release what we call 13F filings, which are basically just a form which announce what stocks they're holding, what they're selling, what they're buying, and what they're really doing. Now, we are currently going through that period where these filings are released, and so we're getting out loads of different ones from loads of different investors, Michael Burry included. We're also getting really valuable information out from some of the world's most powerful investors and billionaires. Of course, Michael Burry is no different to those people. He runs Scion Asset Management, a hedge fund, and so he has to release this information as well. Last quarter, though, we got something really weird coming right out of Michael Burry's hedge fund, as he sold almost every single position he had, and I mean literally almost everything. About 98.5% of the stocks that he was holding 3 months ago have now been sold off, and they haven't been replaced with any other positions. To put this into perspective, last quarter his filing announced that he had $200 million worth of stocks in his hedge fund, and right now he has merely $3 million. Now, what exactly did he sell? Well, actually, absolutely everything he owned. He had $18 million worth of Google and $18 million worth of Facebook, and they've both been sold. He sold $22 million of one healthcare stock and $18 million of another healthcare stock. He sold $19 million of a travel agency and another $19 million of Warner Brothers Discovery stock. He held about 20 different positions, and over the last 3 months, every single one of them was sold in its entirety. One of the positions that he did actually sell, though, was a little bit of an outlier, because instead of being a standard stock that he owned in a company, he actually owned a hell of a lot of options and put contracts on Apple in particular, and he likely sold those at a loss. Now, just the simple nature of 13F filings, it means it's incredibly hard to actually know the details of options contracts in general. We don't know, for example, the strike prices of these put contracts. We don't know their expiry dates. We don't know when the options were taken out in the first place, and we don't know what they were worth when Burry decided to sell them. All we really know is that he used to have a short position of some size on Apple, but now he doesn't. He's exited out of that position. But before we get on with the rest of the video, first a quick word from this video's sponsor, Masterworks. Now, this heat map here shows the year-to-date performance of a bunch of different assets, and as you can see, it's a sea of red. If you've owned any stocks throughout 2022 so far, the chances are that you've been getting hammered. But this right here, the green, is Art's performance, and whilst everything else is down by 20, 30, or even 40%, Art's auction sales are up 32% for the year. The New York Times recently called fine art bulletproof, but art isn't just about stability, it's also about great returns. Like this Marilyn Monroe painting, originally bought for $5,000, it was recently sold this summer for $195 million. That's an annualized return on investment of 21% for over 55 years. And to make the case for fine art better than I ever could, contemporary art has outpaced both gold and the S&P 500 while inflation is above 3%. Now, up until recently, most investors simply didn't have a way to invest in fine art, but that's all changed thanks to this video's sponsor, Masterworks. Now, I've been talking about Masterworks for months now, and what they're doing is simply brilliant. They're securitizing paintings with the SEC so that their 450,000 members can add art into their investment portfolios through fractional investing. And the results so far have been rather incredible. So far, each of the 4 paintings that they've sold after offering them on their platform have each delivered over 30% net returns to their investors. So if you want to join the thousands of my subscribers that are already on Masterworks, you can skip the waitlist by clicking the link in my description for VIP access. Now, why is he actually doing this? Well, there are lots of different potential reasons, but the most obvious one is that he basically thinks stocks are about to crash. Now, if you've paid attention to what he's had to say in the past, then this really shouldn't surprise you. For example, he recently put out this tweet here. The S&P 500 completed a 22% 2-month rally and the Nasdaq a 43% rally. The S&P would fall another 42% and the Nasdaq another 48% by the bottom post-WorldCom in late 2002. May 21st, 2001, can't shake that silly pre-Enron, pre-9/11 and pre-WorldCom feeling. Then, a day later, Michael Burry came out and tweeted this. Contrary to the internet and the Twitter sphere, there have been bear market rallies that eclipsed 50% retracement and led to a lower low. April 1930, November 1938, June 1946, and since 1950, November 1968. It depends on how you define a bear rally and a cycle, and life over charts. Basically, what he's talking about there is there's this idea going around recently that over the last 6 weeks or so, markets have been up and not by a small amount. And so there's this idea being pushed that the bear market is over, that we're in for a bull market, and there's no reason to be short on any kind of position. Burry, though, is pointing out the fact that history doesn't support this idea or this thesis, and a strong bear market rally doesn't mean that the bear market as a whole is over. He clearly thinks that actually stocks have space to go further down, drawing on previous crashes like the dot-com bubble that we saw in the early 2000s. It makes sense then that he's selling his stocks because he thinks prices are falling, so why wouldn't he be selling his stocks? There is, though, one very weird thing going on with Michael Burry's portfolio that we saw after this last filing, and it's surrounding the GEO Group, which is the only stock that Burry is holding, and actually it's the only stock that he bought over the last quarter, adding $3 million worth of these shares after never owning any of these shares before in his life. Now, $3 million worth of shares may sound like a lot, and to you and me it really is, but to Michael Burry it isn't. It's pennies, and it's actually the only position that his hedge fund is currently holding that's revealed on his 13F, with almost everything else likely being held in cash or equivalents. Now, I personally think that this is actually a message from Michael Burry, and it's a point that he's making, that it's the only kind of stock that he is bullish on because he thinks that we're going to see a change in the world order, or in the very least, how the US is operating. Now, what actually does the GEO Group do? Well, mostly they run private prisons throughout the United States. Now, that's obviously an unpopular industry for obvious reasons. It's also quite a small company itself, with a market cap of around about $800 million at the time Burry made this investment, and this isn't really in line with anything he's done before. It's far too small a position compared to what he would usually take out. Of course, Michael Burry having the cult following that he does, this stock has seen a massive increase in its share price since this news was released, with it rising 17% over the course of just a couple of days as people have been copying his trades. Now, what's the message that I think Burry is sending out to the world by making this purchase? Well, for this, I'm afraid we do have to leave the world of finance just for a moment and enter the world of Michael Burry's politics. Now, Burry is a very conservative figure, and he frequently tweets in support of Republican policies and Republican politicians and against Democrat policies and politicians. He also frequently talks about crimes and the lack of prosecution or the failure of police to actually prevent these crimes in the first place. This tweet here from just a few days ago is a perfect example of that, showing an instance where the police are failing to prosecute hate crimes when it doesn't go in a certain direction. Now, what Burry is saying by buying just a private prison company is clear in my opinion. He thinks the United States is going to move further into turmoil, and it's going to see its incarceration rate increase as violence increases in general, with things like the rioting we saw a couple of years ago, and GEO Group is his subtle tale of getting that message out. I don't really think this is actually an investment decision on behalf of Burry. I think it's far more political and far more about taking a stand than anything else. It's such a small position compared to the positions that he usually takes out. It's pretty unsubstantial, and it seems like it's specifically done to garner attention and make a story, being the only position he's currently holding in his firm. Now, with that being said, there is a massive problem behind everything about what I've just spoken about. It's nearly impossible to know exactly what Burry is actually thinking. He frequently tweets in short and cryptic ways, and sadly, he never really speaks to the media for extended articles. And sadly, he never really speaks to the media or anyone else, so we never get interviews or extended takes from him. This tweet right here is a perfect example of that. This supply glut at retail is the bullwhip effect. Google it. Worth understanding for your investing endeavors. Deflationary pulses from this year equals disinflationary in CPI later this year. Fed reverses itself on rates and quantitative tightening, and then to cycles. This tweet is from just over a month ago, and it seems to give credence to the idea that inflation might be falling, and Burry is supporting that idea. It's a pretty simple theory, and it is well established. It's about businesses building up inventory that they then need to sell off because they're holding too much and they need that cash flow. But these high levels of supply cause prices to fall, and that is known as the bullwhip effect. The problem is, it's hard to tell if this tweet is saying what will happen, and that will be the end of it. The last bit of the tweet there where he points to cycles, in my opinion, might mean that he thinks the Federal Reserve is going to pivot too early and that actually inflation won't be over, and as a result of that, it will then rise again once the Fed actually pivots. The truth is though, I don't know if this is the case because that's literally just one word that he came out and said, and I'm not 100% sure how to interpret that tweet. I don't really think anyone knows how to interpret that final bit there. To make matters worse, a few weeks later, he then tweeted this here. You heard it here first, or second, or third. Now that's appearing to mock a Business Insider article which was looking over that tweet that we just looked at that he made before. Does he think that that specific journalist misinterpreted his words? Or maybe he's just laughing at the recycled nature of that journalist's content? It's really hard to see exactly what he's saying here. Finally then, I have one final great big caveat behind this entire theory and a warning to anyone thinking about trying to copy Michael Burry's trades. The simple fact is, we don't actually know what he's doing right now because 13F filings are just a snapshot of time in the past. This filing that he released shows what he was holding on that specific day, and since then he could have bought or sold a myriad of different positions. It's also worth noting that 13F filings have a very weird way of determining the value of certain assets. If we take a look at the recorded assets under management of Cyan Asset Management, there's some very weird stuff going on over recent years. Back in 2021, he reportedly had assets under management of $2 billion. Then 3 months later, it had fallen down to 40 million. And then 6 months after that, it was back up to 200 million before falling down to just 3 million. Now that much money isn't actually being made or lost every quarter, or it isn't being withdrawn or added to his fund either. It's just the silly way that these filings are reported. We do know that Burry sold all but $3 million worth of the assets that his fund was holding, and he's now probably holding hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, but that isn't shown on 13F filings. That $2 billion spike that we saw in the early half of 2021, well, that was likely due to the weird way in which options are recorded, and that probably didn't represent $2 billion worth of capital actually entering and leaving his fund. As usual, when it comes to Michael Burry, it's really hard to make perfect sense of what he's actually saying, what he's trying to tell us, and even what he's doing. But I will, of course, try to keep you all updated as we move forward into the future, so we know exactly what's happened in the past at least. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. It really does help. If you want to join our exclusive community, then check out our Patreon. You get access to our Discord server and extra content like access to my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. Thank you all for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.